this world, they resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Welcome. How are you tonight? Good. I am so glad you're here and humbled by all the faces I see. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Well, tonight, this is my senior recital of sorts. So I think all of you know, I am working on my biblical storytelling certification. And that is through a network called the Network of Biblical Storytellers International, and it is truly international. When I went to the festival gathering this summer, there were people from South Korea and Australia and everywhere in between, even someone from India who spent 24 hours on a plane with her 2 children who were under 12. It was phenomenal. I am in the Academy for Biblical Storytelling, which is a year-long program, and we're required to sit in on lectures, write papers, record ourselves telling stories, and evaluate each other. There was a 2-day intensive, and when I say intensive, they were 12-hour days back to back. It was phenomenal. I am in this program with 7 other people who are also right now in the process of getting their concerts done. My partner in the class, she did hers this morning during their worship service. So this is happening across the country right now in this season. Now, part of, or I should say a big part of this biblical storytelling certification is about asking the question, what did the original audience experience when they heard what we have codexed as stories in the Bible? So that means the stories have been embodied, not memorized, but embodied as part of the storyteller, as part of the culture, as part of the lifestyle of the community. As such, this year, as I have been just working on all the things that I work on, Genesis has really captivated me, particularly the stories in Genesis 1 through 11. For those who aren't good at chapters, that's right up until Abraham comes into the picture, those stories. And when I'm asking the question, who is the original audience? What came to mind was Moses. Now, if you don't know, it is traditionally held that Moses is the author of the book of Genesis. And when we think of Moses, we think of the Exodus. So, as this concert has come together, the question that I have been mulling over in my mind is, what would it look like? Could it be? What if the original context of the Genesis stories was the Exodus and the 40-year wandering that the Israelites and the mixed multitude experienced? I also was mulling over and thinking about Genesis. What is there? Is there something beyond what we typically relegate Genesis to as nursery school stories or kiddish? Is there something for us adults? Now, I did say this was more of an adult audience, but it is for everyone. Children are more than welcome. So there'll be a few words that I leave out, but it'll be fine. It'll be about to say. Now, as we go along, we're going to experience 3 narratives from Genesis and 3 narratives from Exodus, but they're going to be intertwined. So they're going to be going back and forth, and I think you'll be able to tell where we are in the story. Also along the way, I'm going to be giving some insights as I study these stories about how they connect. And I'm in no way telling you how to think about these stories. I'm just offering an option of maybe what could be in these stories, and possibly give us an opportunity to think deeper and to develop our own faith journey along the way. So, I also mentioned that storytelling is embodied, right? So if you would, those who are able, please stand. And you're going to embody a little bit with me, okay? So if you would, please repeat after me. They needed this story too. Thank you, Andrea, for embodying with me. Now, when I say embody, I mean your body, okay? So, repeat after me. They needed this story too. Great. Try this. They needed this story too. Let's try one more time. They needed this story too. Great job. We'll try one more time, just regular. They needed this story too. Great. Along the way tonight, I'm going to invite you. You can stop copying me now. That's good. You're good. Sorry, I didn't give you the right cue. Along the way tonight, I'm going to invite you to say that phrase. And here's going to be your cue. And perhaps, good job, let's try it again. And perhaps, great. And I need you to say it that loud because I'm recording this for my professor. So she needs to be able to hear it on my computer way up here. You got it? Good. You can have a seat. All right. So, you ready? Yes. Yes. Exciting. All right. As recorded in Exodus 19 and 20, 3 months after the Israelites left Egypt, they came to the wilderness of Sinai, and they encamped in front of the mountain. Moses went up the mountain and talked to the Lord. And the Lord said, "Reflect on this, Moses, you and the entire house of Jacob. Remember my wonders I did in Egypt, how I bore you on eagle's wings as I brought you to myself. And now, if you will obey my voice and keep my commandments, you will be a delightful treasure to me, over and above all the peoples of the earth. And although all the earth and everything in it is mine, you shall be a set-apart kingdom, a kingdom of priests for my glory." So Moses went down the mountain and told the people this. And the people said, "All that the Lord has said, we will do." And Moses went up the mountain and told the Lord these things. And the Lord said, "Moses, go down to the people and consecrate them. Set them apart, have them wash their clothes, and be ready in 3 days. For in 3 days I will come down in a cloud, and I will speak to you, so that all may hear, and they will know that I am the Lord your God, and they will be faithful to me forever." So Moses went down the mountain and told the people these things, and they did it. They consecrated themselves and washed their clothes and were ready on the 3rd day. Now on the 3rd day, when they came out of their tents, they looked up and they heard thunderings and lightnings, and a great dark cloud had descended on the mountain. And there was a trumpet blast so loud that the Israelites began to tremble. And Moses, he brought the people from the camp to meet God. Moses went up the mountain, talked to God, and when he was done, he came down. And the Lord spoke these words: I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other God before me or beside me. You shall make for yourself no image, whether it be in the likeness of those things in the heavens, upon the earth, or in the oceans below. You shall not bend a knee to bow to them, nor shall you serve them, for I am the Lord your God, and I am a jealous God. Well, the people heard these things, and they witnessed the mountain. Now the mountain was wrapped in smoke, because the Lord had come down in fire. And the smoke from that fire went up like a furnace, and the entire mountain quaked. And the people, they stood far off. And they said to Moses, you talk to us. When you talk to us, we will listen to you. But not that God. For if that God speaks to us, we will surely die. And Moses said, fear not. The Lord your God has come, so that you might have a vision of his holiness ever before you. And with that vision, perhaps you will not transgress him or his ways. And the people said, not today. And they stood far off. But Moses, he drew near the dark cloud where God was. I can empathize with the Israelites. They had just been 430 years enslaved in Egypt, a place where there are a myriad of gods, gods that have the heads of owls and storks, the heads of jackals, the heads of crocodiles. A place where the king, the Pharaoh, says he is the son of Ra, the sun god. A place where their most recent experience with this god is destruction. The 10 plagues: flies, frogs, lice, locusts, boils, the death of the firstborn. The only way out of which is if you painted blood on your door. Surely this God is a God of destruction. Why would I go over there to that mountain quaking? And yet Moses wants the people to meet God. So maybe Moses, whether prompted by God or Jethro, who mentored him for a while, don't know, thinks to himself, I really want them to meet God. But boy, do they have some baggage. So maybe Moses thinks to himself and says, well, perhaps. Let's try that again. Perhaps. There you go. So we jump to Genesis. And I imagine in the imaginative brain that I have, that Moses distributes these stories of Genesis, and they are talked about and mulled over around the campfire. No, this is not a desert, but it's a camp. So here's where Genesis stories are going to take place, by this campfire. And maybe this is the story that Moses tells them as they back away from the mountain. From Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And this is how he did it. Now the earth was formless. It was a wild and wasted place. The deep, dark waters were chaotic and not a place for life. And over all of it was darkness. But then the Spirit of God came and hovered over that deep, and the waters calmed. And the Lord said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And the Lord separated the light from the darkness, and he called the light day and the darkness night. And he looked at it and said, "This is good." And he approved it. And there was evening and there was morning, one day. Then the Lord said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters below and the waters above to separate them." And he called the expanse sky. And he looked at it and said, "This is good." And he approved it. And there was evening and there was morning, a second day. And then the Lord said, "Let all of the waters be gathered together in one place, and let dry land appear." And it was so. And the Lord said, "Let vegetation of every kind grow, trees with their fruit, and every type of plant that has seed in it." And it was so. There was evening and there was morning, a third day. And then God said, "Let there be lights in the sky, and let them be there as a reminder, a token of my provision. Let them mark the seasons and the days and even the years." So God created the sun to mark the days and the moon to mark the nights. He even put the stars up there. And there was evening and there was morning, the fourth day. On the fifth day, the Lord said, "Let the sky be filled with every type of winged creature, and let the oceans below teem with life as well." So the sky was filled with every type of winged creature, and in the oceans, leviathans, great animals, and every other kind of ocean animal that the ocean brings forth abundantly. And God looked at it, and he approved it, because it was good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let there be animals upon the ground, wild beasts and domesticated animals, and every type of crawling thing." And it was so. And then the Lord said, Let us make man in our image. So in the image of God, did he make man, both female and male, both in the image of God. And he said to them, I bless you. Be fruitful, multiply, subdue the earth, using its resources in service to your God and each other, and have dominion. Make good choices about the stewardship. And God went on saying, look, every tree that fruits and every plant that has seed in it, I give to you for food. Likewise for the animal, every tree that fruits and every plant that has seeds in it, I give to them for food. There was evening and there was morning, the sixth day. And on the seventh day, God rested from all he had created. And he took the seventh day and he set it apart, because on that day he rested, for he had finished all his creation. Now I wonder, maybe the Israelites needed that story as a reminder that although we do see God decreating things, maybe it's not his primary trait. Maybe he is a creator. And maybe all of those gods in Egypt, the sun, the jackal, the crocodile, even the Nile, maybe they aren't really gods, but just good things that God created. Now, this isn't the only encounter that the Israelites had with God. Before Mount Sinai, there was another incident, and I think you've heard of this one. From Exodus 16 and 17. Just 6 weeks after the Israelites left Egypt, they came to encamp in the wilderness of Sin. Now, the wilderness of Sin is about halfway between Elim and Mount Sinai. And there, the entire house of Jacob, which means one who wrestles with God, began to murmur against Moses and Aaron, saying, oh, that the Lord would have killed us in Egypt. At least there we had flesh pots to eat. Juicy, succulent meat just overflowing, and bread to fill our stomachs to the full. But you, Moses, you have brought us out here to let us die of hunger. And the Lord said to Moses, I will make bread to rain down from heaven, that my people might eat. They are to go out every day to collect a portion of it, and in this way, I will test them to see if they will or if they will not walk in my law. And it was so. After that, the whole encampment of Israel moved out from the wilderness of Sin by stages as the Lord commanded, and they moved on to a different wilderness. Now, in this wilderness, there was no water, and the entire household of Jacob, which means one who wrestles with God, began to contend with Moses, saying, give us something to drink. There's no water here. And Moses said, why do you find fault with me? It is the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Why do you test his patience?" And the people said, "Give us something to drink. You have brought us out here to kill us, and not just us, but you have brought us out here to kill us and our children and our livestock of thirst." And Moses cried out to God, saying, "What am I supposed to do? These people are about to stone me." And the Lord said, "Moses, go out in front of the people. Take some of the elders with you, and also that rod that you struck the Nile with. And behold, I will stand before you at Mount Horeb, also known as Mount Sinai. And there, take the rod and strike the rock, and water will pour out for the people to drink." And so he did. Oh, the Israelites. They've got some baggage. Now, not only did they just spend 400 years in Egypt, where destruction was just kind of part of life, during that 10th plague, where they had to paint blood on the door, they were also instructed to have this meal we now call the Passover. You remember that meal? Yeah. It was an elaborate meal. And part of that, the instructions for that meal was that there would be no leftovers. So if you had a lamb that was too big for your family, you were to invite others over so that there would be no leftovers. A wonderful feast. And yet, not long after that, they left Egypt without enough time even to bake their bread. Is this God on the mountain that came down in fire, surrounded by smoke, and the earth quaking? Is he a God of feast or famine? So far, their experience, I think, is going toward... So as Moses sees this, he's thinking, man, I really want them to meet God, even with all their baggage. And he thinks to himself, perhaps they need to hear this story too. I think you can do it a little faster. He thinks to himself, perhaps they need to hear this story too. Great job. From Genesis chapter 2. Now, before any tree sprang up, before any herb of the field took root, before God caused the rain to come down, because there was no one to till the earth, there came up from the ground a mist, a vapor, that watered the entire surface of the earth. And the Lord, he took some dust and he formed a man. And then the Lord blew into the nostrils the breath of life. And the man became a living being. Then the Lord planted a garden in Eden. Now, Eden means delight. And there in the garden, the Lord made every type of tree that is pleasant and desirable and good for food to grow. The Lord also made a river come out of Eden to water the garden. And as it passed the garden, that river split into four. The first is Pishon, and that word means gushing or generous. That river flows past the land of Havilah. Now there is very good gold, high quality gold. There is also bdellium, which is a type of sticky resin. The second is Gihon. Now Gihon flows down and around Cush. The third, the Tigris, flows down through Assyria. And the fourth is the Euphrates. God took the man and placed him in the garden to cultivate it, to guard it, to keep it. And the Lord went on to command the man, saying, "Every tree that produces fruit is yours to eat, except the tree of knowing the difference between good and evil, the tree of knowing the difference between a blessing and a curse. You aren't even to touch it, for if you eat it on that day, you will surely die." Maybe the Israelites needed that story to remind them how attentive God was to their creation. Not just them as a whole people, but each and every one of us. Not just our creation, but also the place in which we live, which happens to be a place of delight. I also find it very interesting that there's those 4 verses in there about the 4 rivers, which probably most of us have skipped over because it's names in there that are hard to pronounce sometimes, right? But right after a story about water gushing out from a rock, Mount Sinai no less, we have 4 rivers that flow past what we could say are the 4 most prominent civilizations of the time. And as the Israelites are longing, probably romanticizing what they don't actually remember correctly, you know how we do that? For these flesh pots and this bread, perhaps it's a reminder to them that all that good stuff over there in Egypt and everywhere else they're going to encounter all flows from one place. Maybe. Also interesting about this story is the Pishon that flows through Havilah. Havilah is the last stop on your way into Egypt, or the first stop on your way out. And that bdellium, that sticky resin, the Hebrew word that is used for that, is only used one other place. When we talk about manna, maybe the Israelites needed a reminder that God will provide for them. Maybe. Now, I also imagine Moses, perhaps, as time goes on, their 40 years in the wilderness, as one generation is dying, a new generation has been born who doesn't remember, has no experience as slaves in Egypt. Maybe Moses says, "All right, guys, we need a little history lesson. Mm-hmm. So he tells them this story from Exodus 1 and Exodus 4. Now Joseph and his brothers all died, along with his entire household of that generation. But the descendants of Jacob, they were fruitful and they multiplied abundantly. They multiplied and they grew in strength to the point that they filled the land. But then there arose a king who did not know Joseph and all that he had done. And the king looked out over the Israelites and said, "They've multiplied abundantly. They're pretty numerous and they're pretty strong. I'm pretty sure they outnumber us, and I'm pretty sure they're stronger than us. Now, what if, by chance, war befalls us, and the Israelites decide to fight in our army, and then they fight against us and escape?" So, the Pharaoh and the Egyptians decided to set taskmasters over the Israelites to oppress them and to heap burden upon burden upon burden on them. But the Israelites continued to multiply and continued to grow in strength, so much so that it vexed the Egyptians. Yeah. It vexed them so that they decided to make the Egyptians work in all manner of brick and mortar, to make them work in all manner of field work, to the point that it was harsh and severe in every job that they did. And the Pharaoh made the Egyptians build store cities of Pithom and Ramses. Now Moses tried his darndest not to be sent back to Egypt. And Moses said to the Lord, "The elders will not believe me. They will say, 'Surely the Lord has not appeared to you.'" And the Lord said to Moses, "Moses, take the rod in your hand and cast it upon the ground." And he did. As he cast the rod upon the ground, the rod became a snake, the symbol of power and divinity of the Pharaoh. As he cast the rod down, it became a snake, and Moses fled. And the Lord said, "Moses, pick up the serpent by its tail." And he did. And as he did, the serpent turned back into a rod. And the Lord said, "Do this in front of the elders, that they may know that I have sent you and will believe." Now, I don't want to dismiss any middle schoolers that are in the room, but I imagine there were some middle school age Israelites, or maybe other ages too, who are like, "You know what, we've been in the desert all this time, we see snakes all the time. It's fine." They probably play with them, swing them around, chase them. And Moses was like, "Perhaps they need to hear the story too." Yeah. Let's try this one. from Genesis chapter 3. Now the snake was the most crafty of all the creatures the Lord made. And the snake came to Eve and said, "Did the Lord really say you cannot eat of every tree?" And the woman said, "We may eat of every tree, all of the trees that fruit, except for the tree of knowing the difference between good and evil, knowing the difference between a blessing and a curse. We can't even touch it, for if we do, we will die." And the serpent said, "You won't die. God knows that if you eat it, you'll be like him, knowing the difference between good and evil. In fact, you will be a god." And the woman, seeing that the tree did look pleasant and desirable for eating, she reached out and she gave some to her husband, who and at once their eyes were opened and they realized they were naked. So they sewed some fig leaves together to cover themselves. Then Adam heard the Lord God walking in the garden in the cool of the day and hid himself. And God said, "Adam, where are you?" And Adam said, "I heard you coming, and I hid because I was naked." And God said, "Who told you you were naked?" "Did you eat of the tree?" And Adam said, "The woman you gave me? She gave me some and I ate." And God turned to Eve and said, "What happened?" And Eve, "The serpent, he tricked me and I ate." And God turned to the serpent and said, "Because you have done this, you are cursed above all the wild beasts of the field. You will drag yourself on your belly for the rest of your life, and you will eat the dust of the earth and everything that it contains." And all the middle schoolers were like, "What the flock?" Perhaps Moses thought they needed to hear that one to understand that the serpent may be us. When we come up with ideas of building grand things, tricking each other into thinking they outnumber us, so we must oppress them. Maybe they needed that story to remind them Egypt wasn't as romantic as you are making it out to be. And maybe after all of that, They still didn't get it. And Moses was like, well, perhaps. Now all the people had one language. All the people. And as they traveled east, they came to a valley, and there they decided to settle. And there in that valley, they looked to each other and said, come on, let's make bricks of mud and bake them. And then let's use mortar with those bricks too. Build a tower so tall that its head reaches into the sky. And then we will make a name for ourselves. And then we won't be scattered around the earth as the Lord told us to. Then the Lord came down to look at what they were doing. And the Lord said, this is not good. The people are all of one language, and whatever they conceive, be it a blessing or a curse, they will be able to achieve. And the Lord said, let's go down there and mix up their languages so that they will stop building this tower. And that's what the Lord did. He went down there and mixed up the languages, and they stopped building the tower. That is why this place is called Babel, because the Lord came down and mixed up our languages and scattered us across the earth, just as he commanded us to do in the beginning. Maybe that was the one that turned their mind around. Maybe they needed that one as a reminder that all the greatness of Egypt, built, much of it by the enslaved Israelites. Maybe that was an idol, another piece of baggage they were dragging along that was getting in between them and the God in that dark cloud. Now, some of you who attended the workshop, I saw you smiling, because that was our story. What you may have noticed is that I did a motion similar to one that I did in an earlier story. In the creation story of Genesis 2, remember, God took the dust and formed a man. And the people, when they were all of one language, they took the bricks and the mortar and they formed a tower with a head. Maybe the Israelites needed that story as a reminder that they are not God. They are not creators. And if they do create, it is a false idol. Maybe. I find the juxtaposition of Genesis and the Exodus story fascinating. I hope you do too. There are things in there that we can learn from the Israelites. I've got baggage. I'm not saying you do, but you are human, so yeah. And in that whole process, Moses' aim, standing in front of Mount Sinai, the dark cloud had descended. The smoke wrapped the mountain, smoke streaming up, and yet still Moses drew near the dark cloud where God was. Maybe the Israelites needed the story in Genesis to help them do the same. Holy words long preserved for our walk in this world. They resound with God's own heart. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Words of life, words of hope. Give us strength, help us cope in this world where'er we roam. Ancient words will guide us home. Ancient words, ever true, changing me and changing you. Let us come with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Let us live with open hearts. Oh, let the ancient words impart. Thank you for coming tonight. I am so humbled by it. There are some refreshments out in the fellowship hall. I hope to be able to talk with lots of you tonight. And as we go, I leave us with this. May the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face to shine upon you. May the Lord be generous with each and every one of you. May he turn his face to you when you call. And may the Lord